Sanctuary. With the sound of the carriage's wheels digging through the road, I was sitting silently in my seat while observing the trees around us. Otto was silently sitting beside me and I personally did not feel like talking at all right now. And while I took notice of the birds flying from one tree to another, I felt a sensation of passing through a body water overcome my body before dying down. Immediately going on guard, I heard a commotion come from inside the carriage causing Otto to open up the slide behind him to peer inside. Everything okay back there? Otto asked with a hint of concern and panic present on his face. Lady Amelia has collapsed. Rem's voice replied back instantly panic. The necklace has also been shattered. Otto then visibly shivered before turning towards me. Should we stop the carriage, Subaru? You should have heard her also, right? However, I stayed silent as I looked around with my full concentration with mana strengthening both my hearing and eyes. Hello. Otto said flatly before showing a sad expression. Don't tell me I'm nothing but air now. Suddenly feeling a vibration go through the ground, I immediately turned towards Otto with a finger to my lips before immediately standing up and churning the mana inside my gate. Ye got some nerve coming here and stinking up to place stranger. An angry voice came from above immediately making me look up at a falling figure rapidly approach me. Dunno what I thought was about to happen. But why met Garfield and I don't want any reeking figures like yer. Immediately pushing Otto off the carriage, I reinforced my legs and waited for the man to get closer to me. And as he rapidly fell towards me, he let out a laugh before throwing a nasty kick towards the top of my head. Seeing it, I easily dodged it and threw a reinforced punch at full power towards his liver before he could touch the carriage and managed to land a solid hit. Boom. Immediately after feeling the impact, a loud boom resounded throughout the air as his body broke through the speed barrier and went through a lot trees caused a massive line of dust and destruction to ensue. Jumping off the carriage softly, I started to walk towards the area where Garfield flew off and reinforced my eyesight to see exactly how much damage he took from that punch. And with my eyesight, I caught him standing up with shaky legs as his face showed an expression of pain. My punch had done exactly what I wanted and made his legs weak. Coughing out a bit of blood, he wiped it with his hand before looking towards me with a frown. 'Twas a good hit I threw out. But while he was standing, a aura of earth mana surrounded him and he casted a healing spell to make himself stand up straight. However, his healing magic wasn't potent enough to remove the issue with his legs. But to believe to Garfield will fall to just that now. He then started to make a couple steps towards me and his aura started raised before a icicle of magic flew past and hit the ground in front of him. Smiling, I looked at one of my cuffs that was messy from my punch and straightened it out before walking towards where that icicle came from. To walk away from me. The coward walks away from his problems, to makes he a coward. Silently ignoring him, I walked near Rem who was the one who threw the icicle before noticing Beatrice standing beside her with a deep frown. The wise man walks away when fighting isn't required. She said with an annoyed expression before turning towards me. Is that Garfield person you were talking about? He's awfully annoying I suppose. I only nodded at her question before turning towards Rem before pointing towards Garfield. Is Amelia alright? I heard she went unconscious before that guy attacked. Yes, she's still breathing, it seems she's only fainted. Garfield noticing Rem gritted his teeth in anger. To tell me you trust to guy Rem. To bastard reeks. Rem and Beatrice then just sent a glare towards Garfield before Otto came up whole rubbing his behind while crying silently and yelled. You could have thrown me softly Subaru. Otto then wiped his tears before looking at Garfield with a serious expression which is starkly different compared to his usual state. I hope you know you're talking to the man who killed Sloth and took down the white whale. I don't care. I still don't want to guy anywhere near Sanctuary. Y'understand right Rem? Rem hearing this just sighed deeply before raising her head towards Garfield. Garfield, Subaru has saved not only me but even Rem, Amelia, and the little girl beside me. Who's a little girl? Smirking demonically down at the lowly Baba, Rem then looked towards me with a soft smile before walking up to me and giving me a hug. He's even the man who I'm in love with. Garfield hearing this suddenly froze in place and blinked as he looked at Rem hugging me. Huh. B, what about the CU? Frowning, Rem looked towards Garfield with a glare causing him to freeze mid-speech. Because I know him well enough to know he won't harm me. And I want you to at least give him a chance. Frowning, Garfield took one last look between us and looked about to say something but just sighed when he looked at Otto, Rem, and Beatrice staring daggers at him. Sure, but I will tear him apart myself if he acts out of line. Just because you like him doesn't mean I gato. He then let out a huff before flinching in pain and felt his side before looking at me with a smirk. But to punch of his is something I like. Smiling, I rubbed my wrist that was throbbing and sent him a smirk. And you got a hard body, Garfield, but as they say, the dumbass who bites on molten iron only gets hurt, right? Hearing me use a familiar phrase, he took a good look at me before noticing me holding my wrist and started to laugh. You got a bit of words to with to wrist of yours. Hearing him, I also raised my head to laugh with him. However, there wasn't anything light about our laughs. I could still tell he hated my guts, but not as much as before. And as he still didn't trust me, I sure as hell wasn't going to trust him either. And it seemed that Otto took to notice of the tone of our laughter and started to sweat a bit before turning towards Beatrice. Isn't there something off about them? Putting one of her eyes on him, she then closed them before letting out a sigh and started to walk back. Got enough carriage. They are just two idiots trying to one-up each other. Otto then made a confused expression before turning towards Rem. What does that mean? Doing the same exact thing Beatrice had done, she just sighed while looking at me before going towards the carriage with a forced smile. They are just having fun in their own way. Now completely confused, Otto turned towards me with a miserable expression before poking me on the arm. Why are you two laughing? Did I miss a joke or something? Garfield and I then stopped laughing before turning towards Otto, seeing him all confused and looking miserable. We then looked towards each other's faces calmly before starting to break out in laughter once again. Alright, I'll just go take care of the carriage. Otto said with a sigh before going to check on Petrash, who was also looking at the two of us with amusement present in her reptilian eyes. Now with our carriage parked in front of a small cabin present near the village of the sanctuary. We had put up Petrash in the stables and were greeted by Ram before being led inside by a now grinning Garfield. Come on in. Tain't the prettiest inside, but home is still home. Walking in, I immediately notice the smell of food being cooked and a table that has silverware already set up. The fireplace has been fed, making the cabin have a cozy temperature, while the decorations on the walls and tabletops make it certainly feel cozy. Grandma. I'm home. Hearing the voice, the sound of some cooking utensils being put down sounded out from the kitchen before a small figure came through the door. Seeing this figure, I could see visibly Beatrice freeze from shock for a moment before bursting into tears and running towards her. Mama. 16 comments 0 vote. Ironing out some things. Mom. To hell you going on about? Seeing Beatrice hug the confused Ryazu with tears running down her face, Garfield immediately tried to grab Beatrice. Garfield, stop. The Ryazu clone then yelled, causing him to freeze up and look towards her face. Looking into her eyes, he could see that he no say in her wishes and let out a tisk before turning to walk out the door. I dunno what to hell is going on. He then whipped his head towards me with clenched teeth and eyes of rage. But I for damn sure blame you for it. He then walked out the door and slammed it, leaving the room to be filled with the sobs of Beatrice and the silence of everyone inside of it. Looking around, I noticed Rem silently staring at Beatrice as Otto let out a sigh before walking past me with a miserable expression to get to the door. I'm not getting paid enough for this. Wait a second. I don't get paid at all. And with that conclusion found by him, I swiftly swung open the door before kicking him outside. Hitting the ground outside with his hands and knees, he turned over his shoulder to see me calmly smiling down at him. Oi. Where is my pay, Subaru? He then leaned towards me before preparing to leap. I have no idea what you're talking about. And with a swift action, I closed the door in his face as he went flying directly into it, causing a loud thud to come from the door. Wiping my hands, I looked over towards Rem and pointed my hands towards the kitchen in hopes that she would give me a bit of privacy with these two. Noticing my gesture, she took one last glance over her shoulder at the two before going into the kitchen. And as Ram was currently looking after Rosewall, I have to cut this conversation short. When Rosewall learns of Beatrice and Rem being here, he will surely snap and call this current useless. Amelia is currently unconscious too, so no worries about her learning things she shouldn't bear. Anyways, I put my hand on Beatrice's shoulder, causing her to turn her tear-glazed face towards as she let a soft hic. What do why you want? Sighing, I walked towards one of the couches present in the room before sitting down on it and patted the leather next to me. Hurry up and sit down so I can explain why that isn't the Ryazu you know. Freezing up, Beatrice turned towards the Ryazu clone that is calmly staring down towards her with interest present inside her eyes and no love at all. Seeing this, she backed up in confusion before turning back towards me. Then what is that thing? That thing isn't Mom. I then turned towards the clone who was just calmly staring towards me. Can you tell her about the others? In case you're blind, she had a connection to the past. You. Hearing this, the clone let out a sigh before turning towards Beatrice with a frown. I know. We know. But we don't want to tell her. But she should at least have some of the questions answered right. Or at the very least have some of them told to her. Hearing me, the clone's frown then deepened before closing her eyes and held the bridge of her nose in silence. Seeing her in silence, I assumed her to be communicating with the other clones and went to try and convince them all while they are talking to one another. After all, the core would have wanted this to happen. I'm positive it would love to know just how much pain its words have afflicted onto her daughter. Opening her eyes, she sent a glare towards me before pointing towards the door. You should go. She then pointed towards Beatrice, who was just silently standing there trying to figure out what we were talking about with a sad smile. Only then will I tell her what she needs to know. Like you said. She would have wanted this to happen. Sighing, I got up and went towards the door before making a frown they can't see. Make sure to tell her all you can. She is after all an extremely valuable person to me. Opening it, I remembered something and turned towards the kitchen before yelling in its direction. Rem. Come with me real quick so these two have some alone time to talk. I then closed the door, before turning to gaze up at the sky and frown deeply. With my now enhanced eyes, I can see the mana present in the atmosphere rapidly moving towards one area of the sanctuary. The reason for this is because of a certain idea I got from a certain show about hunters. All I got to do is run mana throughout my optical nerves and set them at the correct frequency to see mana. It seems Rosewall has decided to start his spell to cover the sanctuary in snow earlier than I anticipated. And with my knowledge of his current condition, he could very well die if he sets off a spell of that magnitude. But knowing just how crazy Rosewall is, I'm sure he doesn't care at all about dying at all. But for you Rosewall, I can't let you die just yet. Or at least, not yet. It really all depends on how well this situation goes in my favor. And as he is weakened and in a state of focus, I could just very well walk into his room and snap his neck with one of reinforced hands. But I'd much rather keep alive him for the benefits. My benefits, of course. Walking inside of the cabin where the mana is rapidly being gathered, I immediately noticed Ram lying down unconscious. And on a bed, is a silent Rosewall, and he stared directly into the fires of the fireplace with sunken eyes. Feeling my gaze, he then slowly turned his one eye towards me before sighing and looking towards the fireplace again. So you're finally here. Looking at Ram and his attention on the fireplace. I put together a scene inside my head and let out a chuckle before grabbing a chair. I then turned the seat around and sat onto it while leaning my arms on top of its back and smiled. So the book of truth is gone, huh? I then saw him grit his teeth in anger before the mana inside of his gate started to churn rapidly. Seeing this with my eyes, I immediately threw a knife past his face and hit the wall behind him before letting out a sigh of disappointment. For a 400-something-year-old man, you sure don't know how to control your emotions, don't you? Also, I can see your mana, so don't try anything like that again. Looking towards me with a gaze of caution, I proceeded to raise my arm to throw a knife before he sighed and looked back at the fireplace. You can very well kill me right now, Subaru. But I'm guessing you want me alive, correct? Yes. Hearing my yes, he let out a snort before bringing his back to laugh in a second of insanity. Oh, Subaru, how foolish you are. I want to die and you can't change that. He then went on laughing while I just put my head over my arms and silently waited for him to settle down his insane laughter. And when he finally calmed down, I took my chair and put it back where I found it before turning towards Roswald. Well, how about we make this simple, Rashi? We are both individuals that love using our time effectively, so let's make it to where whoever wins gets the loser as their slave. Propping his arms on his lap, he held his chin with his hands and looked at me with a look of amusement present inside of his eyes. But why would I bet on something so stupid? If I win, you would just die anyway, making your terms not apply to yourself. Chuckling for a bit, I quickly silenced myself and looked at him with a cold expression. The Great Rabbit, the Mansion Attack, and the Demon Beast Attack are all your doings, Rosewall. Raising his eyebrow, he let out a yawn before laying his back onto the bed below him. He then stretched his arms a bit before looking at me with boredom all over his face. So, what does that have to do with anything? Smiling silently with my eyes closed, I put my hands out to my sides before opening my eyes and staring directly into his pupils. I can return by dying, of course. Freezing, he looked towards me in disbelief before starting to chuckle. And with that chuckle he propped himself up and looked directly into my eyes with a crazy smirk. Then you're a lot more valuable than I thought, Subaru. Reaching to reveal my necklace, I took it off before putting it in between Rosewall and I. And with a confident smile, I looked at him in joy. Rosewall L. Mathers, do you accept my challenge? Also looking towards me with the same confidence, he just stuck his hand towards the necklace. I accept your challenge. 16 comments, 0 vote. This is pretty OD. D. I accept your challenge. And with those words from Rosewall, I felt the spirit inside the necklace shake in excitement before a connection between both I and Rosewall began to form. When the connection was finally finished forming, the spirit inside the stone sent me a chuckle before going back to sleep. It is done, Rosewall. Now with the contract formed, I slipped my necklace on before hiding it once again. And once I done making sure my collar was straightened, I looked over towards Ram, who was still unconscious, before sending a glance of pity towards Rosewall. If she's anything like her sister, you're about to earn yourself a new hole, my friend. Bringing his gaze towards Ram, he let out a soft smile of understanding. But after that small smile, he immediately sent one of his normal smiles towards me. Oh, don't worry about me now. I'd worry about yourself first. He then put himself into a meditative position and began focusing on his spell. And seeing this, I chuckled a bit before walking out of the cabin. Rosewall, making such a hasty deal with me was a mistake. Telling you I have to die to go back in time has led you to believe I am not the smartest. I even took advantage of your emotional state being unstable after losing your precious book to build up your already broken emotional into something I want. Looking up into the sky, I noticed the sun starting to go down and frowned. It seems I need to hurry up my plans. I also have to apologize to Rem when I have the chance. I had to ditch her back at the cabin because of Rosewall. Anyways, I noticed one of the residents of the sanctuary walking along the main road also and decided to ask for directions. Hey there. I said calmly to the half-blood with a wave before rubbing the back of my head in nervousness. Mind giving me a bit of your time? Looking up from the ground and meeting my eyes, he sniffed the air for a bit before making a nervous expression. I'm sorry I left the fireplace burning. He then started to walk away quickly. Noticing this, I strengthened my legs a bit and immediately popped up in front of him again and let out a chilling smile. Oh, come on, sir. It won't take long, I promise. It's just a simple question. Now a bit freaked out and startled, he started to stutter a bit before looking for a direction to escape. Just one question. That's all. Grasping firmly on one of his shoulders to make his face look towards mine, I kept the same smile and looked directly in his eyes. Yeah, that's it, just one. What is it, why you want to know? Taking my hand off his shoulder, I sighed before rubbing the back of my head once again as if I'm embarrassed by my lack of information. I don't know where the witch's tomb is. Can you just point me in a relative direction? Hearing me mention the witch's tomb, his face visibly paled in fright as he looked at me with extreme fear. Seeing this, I sent him a glare to just spill it already. I'm getting a bit tired of this conversation. Hick. It's that way, sir. Looking over where he was pointed, I looked at him with a smile before starting to walk. That's for the help, sir. Hope you live well. Laughing inside as he flinched and ran away in a cold sweat, I came to the conclusion that I should do stuff like this more. Messing with people sure is fun, I suppose. Wait. I suppose. Is that old lowly scraping on me? Arriving at what can only be described as a tomb, I let out a smile as I looked at how it was built. Even with 400 years of decay and lack of management, it still looked magnificent and had an air of elegance in the carvings on its front. Well, anyways, I focused my mind as I walked up its steps and soon found myself standing directly at its entrance. Echidna. How I'm dying to know. And with a lift of my foot, I crossed the invisible line that cellar area, the outside and the inside, and felt my foot sink into the floor. And with my foot, my body was dragged into and I felt myself fall. And while falling, I felt my consciousness slowly start to dull before I soon blacked out. Oh. You're an interesting one, aren't you? You're invited to the tea party, congratulations. Hearing a mature woman's voice, I opened my eyes and found myself to be sitting down. In front of me was a table covered by the shade of an umbrella above it and a woman sitting calmly on the other side. Her silky white hair went past her hair and her arms were propped up on the table with a clear look of interest present on her beautiful facial features. The black dress she wore properly fit her curves to make her feel sexy while also mixing in a sense of elegance. Chuckling, she leaned in on purpose to showcase more of her curves and smiled cheekily. Oh my. Do you perhaps like what you see? Hearing her speak, I immediately made a face of disgust before letting it level out at a deep frown. Noticing this, she let out a pout before leaning across the whole entire table to look me straight in my eyes with her black pupils. I said. Do you like what you see? Sighing, I leaned back before giving her a look of pity. Sorry, I just can't be attracted to you. Huh. What are you, impotent? And with her outburst, she leaned back in her chair and let out a sigh before muttering. I may not care much about my body. But it still hurts, you know. For a woman at least. Unfazed, I tapped the table in front of me before taking notice of something important. Say, where is the tea? I thought this was a tea party. Making a confused face, she then made a look of realization before slamming her fist on top of her palm. Oh. She then looked towards me before sticking out her tongue and tapped the side of her head with her fist. I kinda forgot, my bad. I don't believe that for a single second. Snapping her fingers, 2 cups appeared on both sides of the table. She then picked up her cup and calmly took a sip before looking towards me in expectation. In order to start the tea party, you must also take a sip. Reaching towards the cup, I proceeded to bring it up and stared at the liquid. And with no hesitation at all, I drank every last bit of it before calmly placing the cup on the table. Echidna noticing this let out a blush before looking to the side and muttered loudly. I never saw someone drink my body F fluid so calmly. She then looked towards me again with a blush still present on my face and noticed my lack of reaction and let out a sigh of disappointment and let out a pout. Yeesh, I wanted to at least see you get flustered. But I guess nothing ever phases you, huh? I then looked directly into her eyes before letting out a bitter smile and leaning forward in the table. Sorry, it's just extremely terrible for people like ourselves to meet and talk to one another. Also letting out a sigh, she leaned back in her chair before staring at me with an emotionless face. Tell me about it, it's almost like I'm looking in a mirror. Propping my chin up with my hands, I also stared at her with the same emotionless face and spoke with an almost tired tone. Well, we should probably straight get to the point, right? I'm guessing you also hate wasting your time on pointless projects, correct? Sipping on last of her tea, she places down the empty cup before sitting straight in her chair. And with the exact same emotionless tone and face, she met my gaze. To get straight to the point, you are someone who also seeks out knowledge. So as in return for any question you ask with me being able to answer it, I will also get a question in return along with said answer. Simple enough. I said before cracking my neck. So who goes first? Snapping her fingers, the tea inside our cups was refilled. I'll go first. She said before calmly getting a drink from her cup. What is your name? That should be a good start, right? Smiling, I took a drink of tea before placing it down. The name I go by currently is Nitsuki Sabaru. I then finished all of the tea inside my cup before placing it down on the table. But I won't ask for yours, Echidna. I don't want to waste my chances on stupid questions. Sighing, she drank a bit more. I guess we do think the same. How very unpleasant. I suppose so your turn now. How can I manipulate the OD inside my body? Going silent, she stared at me with full seriousness. How did you know about that? Smirking, I leaned back into my chair and put my arms behind my head. It's still my turn, Echidna. Now are you able to answer the question or not? Snapping her fingers once again, she let out a sigh as both of our cups refilled and took a sip to calm herself before staring towards me. Yes, I'm able to answer this question, but only in theory. In theory it should work, but it's only a theory. I'm unfortunately not able to test it out since, well, I have no OD as a soul. Taking advantage of the refill, I drained the cup before paying full my attention towards her. She's probably spent 400 years going over the secrets of OD. And who's to say she hasn't come up with a proper way to utilize it? Go on. I'm listening. 19 comments, 0 vote. A basket full of golden eggs. Before we begin, do you know what OD is? Leaning back, I ran mana through my brain to improve my memory and remember reading its definition. It's pretty much the life energy that lies dormant inside of every living being. Giving a cocky grin, she leaned forward and pointing at my chest. You're right but also wrong. And with her finger hitting my heart, she stared into my eyes. This energy isn't dormant at all. As you go day by day, your OD is subconsciously burning to keep you alive. So you are technically using it already, just not in a conscious way that is. And personally, I have no idea how to consciously control it either. She then let out a sigh before hugging her chest before pouting. Being dead has made my theories impossible to test out for myself. Get to the point. Alright fine, telling you with words would be a pain so lean your head towards me. Echidna said while licking her hand. Seeing this, I proceeded to stare directly into her eyes. How is the authority of gluttony going to help anything? Messing with my memories is something you don't want to do. Frowning, she just waved me towards herself. I don't know how you came to that conclusion, but who's to say I can't share food? Frowning, I looked at her and started to hesitate. Knowing her personality, she would definitely try and take the upper hand. But then again, I bet she's dying to know about me. Not everyone can tell when an authority is activating with just a glance. And besides, her eyes are currently looking at me as if I'm the most interesting specimen around. And with my mana reinforcement, I can always tell when a memory space is blank, so I'd catch her immediately. Closing my eyes, I leaned forward and felt her hand softly caress the side of my face. And with her caress came an excess of knowledge and theories on the workings of OD. But there was one thing that bothered me. This information was too much. A lot of stuff I have is information unrelated to the conversation. There is even information on mana control and some small theories related to immortality. She has literally sent me everything. Looking up with caution, I saw her with a content smile. This isn't like her. Why? This isn't something I would do. Snapping her fingers to refill our cups once again, she just took a sip in silence before looking at me with a very blank expression. Because I'm dead, of course. And I believe that someone like me will be able to test all of my ideas regardless of morality. Plus, it would be a shame to let all of my knowledge die out, wouldn't it? Especially when someone like yourself can build upon it. She then let out a sad smile and looked down towards her feet. Who knows? Maybe you could even complete what I failed to do. Tisk, her question is going to be a pain in my ass. She's speaking half-truths to make me feel pity towards her before she absolutely clowns me. Sighing, I looked down at the cup below the table and once again drank all its contents. To be totally honest, I have no issues with drinking this stuff. In the end, it's only making my witch factor stronger. Go ahead and get to your question, Echidna. Letting out an annoyed expression, she soon calmed it down before letting out a deep sigh and muttered. I'm dead, you bastard, at least let me have some type of fun. It's been 400 years. Letting out a chuckle, I then froze and grabbed at my chest. Feeling it, I looked towards her with a sly grin. It seems my time is up, Echidna. I can see that. She said as she started to lick her hand. I guess you can choose between counting yourself unlucky or lucky. I was just about to ask you something interesting about someone I know. She then got up from the table and walked towards me before leaning down in front of me. And with her black eyes staring directly into my own, she let out a soft smile. I'll give you the rights to take the trials. But it's only because I'm extremely interested in just what secrets your little mind holds, Subaru. I looked directly into her eyes and let out a chuckle. Oh, you wouldn't want to see what I have stored up there. Your mind wouldn't be able to handle the truths that you would learn. After all, if we're to learn that my life consists of nothing but a novel. Wait a second. No, that's stupid. If I were to learn that my life was written by a higher being, I would become unstable, to say the least. I'd probably just kill to the kill. After all, nothing would matter at that point. My life would consist of nothing but just being a form of entertainment. Letting out a chuckle of her own, she leaned forward and gave me a kiss of the lips. However, there was absolutely no feelings behind it. All I could feel from it was a silent goodbye. And with that soft feeling still upon my lips, I felt myself blank out again. Waking up, I found myself in a very familiar place. Yup. I found myself under the sheets of a bed. And with my eyes now open, I looked around the room and noticed that it was dark outside through the window. And if it's this dark outside, Amelia should have either failed or just begun her trails. Sighing, I sat myself up and stretched to pop the joints that went stiff from my soul leaving it. But as I felt my back pop, I looked to my right and noticed a sleeping Beatrice. This girl really does have a soft heart on her, doesn't she? And looking to my left, I noticed Rem also sleeping peacefully. Shouldn't she be watching Amelia's trials with her sister? And what's with this situation? This feels like some cheesy cliche for a harem. After all, I doubt many people wake up with two girls best to them. Sighing to clear my thoughts, I got into a meditative position and began focus mana through my memory banks. Doing so allowed me to smile almost madly as I saw the sheer amount of knowledge Echidna had becoming my own. But this isn't the greatest thing, she also gave me her experiences. And since her experiences also include authorities, I should be able to use them just fine. Focusing on the witch factor inside my body, I drew out the authority of sloth from it. Unfortunately, to my displeasure, it seems that my limit is 10 arms. As the original wasn't quite as proficient as I am now with Echidna's knowledge, he wasn't able to fully bring out and control all his hands. So while he started at 1, I will start at 10, which is my current limit. But my excitement doesn't end there, I still have a ton of knowledge to go over. All I need now is time, and I'll be plenty prepared for the events of Arc 5. And I'll be able to handle almost everything after that. But if I ever have the chance of meeting an undesired variable, I'll be sure to have a counter for them ready. Plus it doesn't end there. Pulling out the book I had stored away inside my pocket, I looked at the gospel inside my hands and let out a chuckle and whispered. I can make and also destroy these things. 20 comments, 0 vote. A good meal. Being sure not to wake Rem and Beatrice, I proceeded to get out of bed and change into my suit. I'm guessing Rem was kind enough to change me into something more comfortable in case I decided to come to the next morning. Now dressed, I looked towards the two who were currently inside their dreams. The thing that interested me the most, however, is Beatrice's ability to sleep. Does she even dream? Why should a great spirit rest? I mean, Puck also rests inside of Amelia's stone when he is low on mana. So is sleeping for them a way to lessen their mana drain when awake? I mean, normal spirits usually take the form of a ball. So does this mean that Puck and Beatrice's need for mana come from their physical form? I'll just ask Beatrice later. Opening the door, I walk into the room where I left Beatrice and the Ryazu clone to talk things out. I honestly doubt the clone revealed much to Beatrice though. As the clones have developed a will of their own and have grown closer to Garfield, I honestly doubt they would reveal the location of the original. But even if they have not revealed the location, Beatrice should have a door connected to the abandoned shack where the original lies. She did after all form a door there to escape into the forbidden library when it was attacked. Oh. You're awake. A Ryazu clone said as she came inside through the door. Has the girl talked to you about our conversation? Examining the clone's features, I let out a smirk before sitting down on one of the couches inside the living room. Beta, don't you mean Alpha's conversation? I then leaned back and propped my arms on top of the couch before frowning and staring directly into her eyes. You are Beta, correct? Staring at me with just silence, I smiled before feeling my stomach groan from hunger and feel a dry itch from my lips. Feeling these sensations, I let out a frown as I remembered that I honestly haven't had a meal in a little while. Most of my time has consisted of me constantly fighting and moving around from place to place. And even when I had a chance to eat at the Karsten household, Lady Crush became a child mentally, so nobody wanted to eat anything. I also spent most of my time at the Rosewall mansion to take care of some things and make sure Wilhelm knew all the areas where an ambush could come from. Turning towards the still silent Beta, I calmly brought a hand to my face and scratched an itch. Did they all eat while I was knocked unconscious? I'm kind of starving here, Beta. Staring at me for a few seconds longer than she probably intended, she let out a deep sigh before heading towards the kitchen and let out a quiet whisper. Youngsters these days. No manners, eh? Thank you, Beta. Looking over her shoulders at me silently, she let out a quick tisk before going inside the kitchen. She was probably wondering how I heard her whisper. But the simple answer is boosting my hearing capabilities. Also, another thing I learned while going through Echidna's knowledge and experience. It seemed she was awfully familiar with mana strengthening. But she could never figure out the full capabilities of the brain. So she couldn't mix mana with her brain to improve herself. And I can understand entirely why that is. She never had the knowledge of the hippocampus and neocortex and how they work together to recall our memories. And as I was lucky enough to recall this simple fact, all I had to do was recall a lot of my memories and build my abilities from there. Hell, if I wanted to, I could become rich based off the many simple designs and inventions I have learned about. I could even make music in the world and introduce many of the modern instruments. That would actually probably make me a killer in the music industry as a songstress, uses a lyre. And I could probably make a killing in the agriculture side of the kingdom, probably getting the title of knight from the benefits Ludnica or any other kingdoms would receive from it. I could even create new inventions if I do desired also. My ability to raise my thinking speed and perception of time could make a month of effort and research for a normal human just a few years of effort for me. And that doesn't even include my ability to memorize and recall subjects from the modern era. I know what I must do now. It would simply be a waste of potential and ability to gain political and economic power. Reaching into one of my pockets, I pulled out a business card that Russell gave me and let out a grin. Here you go, Beta told me as a plate of leftovers was placed in front of me before she went inside the kitchen once more. Here is a little something to drink also. Reinforcing both my vision and sense of smell, I searched the food and drink for any signs of poison. I then calmly began to dig in silently once I had confirmed that it was safe for me to eat. Thank you, Beta. Now done with my food, I just sat with Beta in the couch while waiting patiently for a crying and panicked Amelia to come through the doors. Thank you for the food, Beta. Did you perhaps make this? No. Well, please thank the one who made it for me. Sure. Sighing from her lack of words, I took another sip from my drink before placing it on the table. Garfield doesn't know the truth about this sanctuary, does he? Your inability to lie is a real pain in your ass, isn't it? You have no idea. She said with a what I can assume to be a frown hidden underneath the robe which covers the bottom of her face with its large collar. I'm fine. Trust me. A pale Amelia said as she came through the cabin's front door. W will be just fine. Tomorrow. Immediately taking action, I got out my chair before going over to her with a worried expression. Taking notice of me, she let out a look of shock. You're awake, Subaru. Letting out a tisk of annoyance, I picked her up into my arms before starting to walk towards her room. The way she ignores her issues and values in others more than herself really is displeasing. I can't even blame Echidna for hating such a character as Amelia. Plus it doesn't help Echidna that she's, supposedly, similar to Satella personality-wise. Hey. Let me down. Amelia said with slight panic and childlike embarrassment as she struggled to get out of my arms. However, my physical strength alone is plenty enough not to struggle. I can walk just fine on my own. Opening the door to her room calmly, I looked over my shoulder at Beta and mouthed a threat about telling Garfield the truth if she doesn't let Amelia rest. Once done with that, I shut the door behind me with my foot before placing Amelia on her current bed. Yeesh. I told you. I'm okay. She said as her mental fatigue began to take its toll. Just let me rest. Please. And as her mental fatigue took her into a slumber, I silently examined her to make sure she was asleep before reaching towards her chest. Feeling the stuff I was looking for, I softly squeezed it with my hand to her a better grip. Inside my hand was the necklace that held Puck, who is currently sleeping. And as I went, though the knowledge Echidna had given me, I came across a form of telepathy I could use on a spirit and sent a message into the stone. Wake up, Puck, it's time to talk about Amelia. And with a bright flash, Puck appeared on my shoulder and sighed in disappointment. So you figured me out, huh? 10 comments, 0 vote. Download the app for greater interaction. You can chat with me about my writing experience apart from the comments section. Havengi. Download app now. Garfield's tantrum. So you figured me out, huh? Seeing Puck appear on my shoulder, I felt slight surprise as he should have been saving up all of his remaining OD and mana for his survival. Why are you wasting mana for this conversation? I voiced out in annoyance while looking at the mana inside his body slowly leak out. Letting out a smirk, he looked towards me with knowing eyes and jumped inside of my shirt before letting out an exclaim of fake shock. Oh. What's this thing here? And while still smirking, he popped his head out of my shirt with the stone of my necklace inside of his mouth. I wonder why, Subaru. With a blank expression, I pulled him out by the nape of his neck. Placing him on my leg, I looked down at him and sighed. How much are you robbing me of Puck? Laughing, he hugged the stone to his chest before making an innocent expression. That makes it sound like I'm doing a crime. I would never do something like that, right, Subaru? Seeing him make jokes and waste his expression ticked me off. He was still burning mana. So because I didn't want him to take much, I just decided to get to the point. You need to leave Amelia. Your contract that was supposed to protect her is instead putting her in pain. Quiet. Now frowning, he floated off my lap before looking at Amelia's sleeping face. Amelia was currently still pale from her trails and even had a cold sweat to go with it. Subaru. Do you like my daughter? Puck said while staring at her face. You can't lie this time though, I will know if you try and fake your answer. Looking at the small figure float in front of me, my eyes turned cold once they switched and landed upon Amelia. I don't like her at all. Her personality is without a doubt displeasing to experience. All I want from her is to be a good ruler for this kingdom so I can take advantage of being her knight and live my life in leisure. Hearing my words, the temperature in the air immediately began to drop noticeably, causing the unconscious Amelia to cough from breathing in the sudden cold air. You remind me too much of her. He said with extreme venom. The way you two view others as objects is disgusting to me. Sighing, I looked toward Amelia before looking towards Puck. She's useful to me, so I won't kill her anytime soon. Is that a good enough reason for you to trust me? Hell, I'll even use a contract to back it up if you want. Looking over his shoulder, he examined me with cold eyes before a sad smile formed on his face and made the room heat up to room temperature. You're telling the truth. Smiling, I looked towards the necklace in his small hands and became interested. With my eyes, I can see the mana inside of the stone getting sucked out of Puck's hands before being remade into mana he can use for himself. And once Puck was nearly back to full, he looked towards me silently before turning back to Amelia. Leave Subaru, I want to see Amelia's face one last time before I go. Yawning, I closed the door to Amelia's room and ran into Garfield and Ram, who were sitting on the couch in silence. Sniffing the air, Garfield made a disgusted expression and gave me a nasty glare. Is T, half-witch alive? Nodding silently towards him, I noticed that his facial features softened a tiny bit and laughed inside my head for a bit. I then looked towards Ram, who was silently looking towards me. Ram, I need to talk with you for a second outside. Garfield frowned and looked between the two of us before locking eyes with me. Why do you need to talk with Ram? In response, I looked at him as if he was idiot. Why do you need to know? It's clearly personal, idiot. Hearing me, he just sat there in silence before an aura from his blessing began to surround his body. Outside. Garfield. Ram said with a glare only to get ignored by him. Is he really throwing a tantrum right now? If so, I'm going to teach him some manners. You'll regret it, you know. I said calmly before proceeding to walk outside of the house. But I did make sure to face towards Ram, who was looking at us calmly. She's probably considering how stupid this situation is. Don't stop us, Ram. He needs to learn. Hearing me, Ram seemed to get my message and went ahead and sat back down. Don't kill each other, please. We still have to free the sanctuary. Garfield let out an audible tisk before being the first to leave the house. Come on, ye bastard, I'm sick of her yapping. 1 second, please. I said with a yawn before going towards Amelia's room. Walking behind Garfield, he just led me on in silence through the woods of the sanctuary before coming up on a large clearing. Inside of this clearing is a few acres of flat land, giving us plenty of room to settle the score. I'm guessing he made this clearing his training spot, and it slowly turned from a bountiful forest into what it is now. Walking across the flat land for a minute or two, we reach the center and Garfield stops before facing me. Are you ready, bastard? Because, the moon will run red with blood, tonight. He said while pointing towards the moon, which was shunting directly over us. But all it did was earn a laugh from me. Did you know that every champion was once a contender who refused to give up? Oh, sorry. You don't, because you have already given up. You just spouting nonsense. Garfield yelled while pushing his leg into the ground. The ground around him then flew up into the air. And once it finally dropped down, it caused a dust storm to form and obstruct my vision of him. I then felt him come my right immediately and dodged as he flew by. He then came again from the left and I just leaned back from a wild hook only to stick my leg in front of me. His leg then clipped mine, causing him to fall forward, but he managed to catch him balance in time. It seems he's taking advantage of his nose in this situation. Pretty smart against the average human, but he unfortunately met me. Swish. Ducking the punch, I felt a stronger one come, but I just leaned to side to easily avoid it. And because of his punching power, the dust around us cleared away, revealing himself to me. He had a frustrated expression on his face before turning towards me and throwing another wild hook. Ducking to his left side, I threw a quick reinforced hook to his liver. Feeling the impact, I saw his legs start to buckle from his body's natural response and smiled towards him. El Shamak. Freezing him in place, I reinforced my eyes and body before throwing a strong right hook towards his chin. But luckily for him, his instincts took over and he moved his head to the side and smirked. But as I could see this, I just moved the mana around my body in a different direction and threw a left hook towards the other side of his chin. Crunch. Feeling and hearing the crunch of his chin, I let out a frown as his legs froze up and he toppled onto his back. Examining him with any mana I had left in me, I could see that the mana inside his body was starting to mix with what I assumed to be OD. However, I just let out a smile before placing my hand upon his chest and thought back to what Puck had done. If I'm correct, it should have been something like this. Jolt. Seeing his body jolt and his eyes shoot open in pain, I let out a large smile as I felt the mana inside of his gate get forcefully pulled out and reformed to fit my own gate. And examining the process in his body, I could see that it was starting to panic subconsciously as the balance between his OD and mana began to break apart. However, my mana capacity began to near its limit, so I decided to back off and examine exactly how the two different energies combine. Watching his energies, they finally perfectly combined within his heart. Thump. Watching him look at me with eyes of rage at the pain he just felt and a face full of teeth. His pupils became more cat-like and his body began to enlarge. His skin then began to produce fur as his muscular and skeletal structure also began to change entirely. Watching it, I can't help but think about how spectacular it is. The OD inside his body burns to produce this transformative effect to make up the impossibility that is this sudden muscular and skeletal change. And with his transformation finally done, he looks down towards me with animalistic eyes before reaching a paw up to his jaw. Crack. Now with a straightened jaw, the combination of healing and his blessing healed it. He then moved it a bit before opening and closing it. Once confirming its functionality, he looked at me and started to sniff the air, causing him to freeze. His eyes then viewed me with rage before a loud roar rang through the forest, causing a shockwave to shoot through the area. And with a growl, he circled around me and started to visibly drool. Seeing this, I met his eyes directly and let out a taunting smile. What's wrong, little kitty? Do you want some catnip? 20 comments, 0 vote. A mere graze. As the giant cat that is Garfield looked down on me with his predatory gaze, I just stood there calmly while examining his current form. You coming or not? Hearing me, he immediately pounced towards me and tried to put me under his two front paws. Seeing this, I immediately dodged it before noticing his two paws starting to sink into the ground. Murak. Casting Murak on myself, I immediately flew off the ground with my reduced weight as the ground began to erupt. Boom. As ground flew up into the air past me and dust flew into the air to block my vision, I used my strengthened eyes and noticed a mana signature launching itself at me. And as the dust cleared from his leap, he went flying towards me with an open mouth ready to swallow me whole. El Murak. Using the mana remaining of the spirit inside my necklace, I immediately cast El Murak, causing Garfield's large teeth to stop directly in front of my face before flying towards the ground. Boom. As another plume of dust went up, I dropped down and immediately used a reinforced kick to blow it all away and reveal Garfield struggling on the ground. Seeing him still under the spell's effects, I landed on top of his back and took off my necklace before immediately stabbing it into his back. Do your thing. Jumping off with the effects of Murak, I floated safely towards the ground and took a few steps back as Garfield started to revert back to his human form. Interestingly enough, his huge cat form seemed to almost compress in on itself before taking the form of human Garfield. And I could see that the odd that was used to activate and produce the transformation had returned to Garfield instead of disappearing. The mana in his body was being rapidly drained, making the synergy between the two energies break off. And as the two energies couldn't work together, his body couldn't sustain the transformation and made him revert back to normal Garfield. Anyways, now in his human form. He shook his head before looking at me with rage and confusion. What did ya do to me? You should be beneath my clod by now. Sticking a finger in my ear, I made a bored expression towards him before staring to walk slowly towards him. I don't need to tell you anything. Seeing me approach him, he immediately flinched before facing me with a serious expression. Seeing his flinch, I took my finger out of my ear and looked at him directly in his eyes with a flat expression. We then gazed into each other's eyes until Garfield looked away for a slight moment. Noticing this, I immediately let out a small smile. You act tough. You also claim to be the protector of Sanctuary. You even say you are the strongest. But I can't help but see you as the opposite. You act tough, but all I see is a scared little boy. You say you want to protect the Sanctuary, but you can't even protect yourself. You say you are the strongest, but you're getting your ass kicked by me. You've also been constantly questioning both my own and Rosewall's intentions in freeing this Sanctuary. But that makes no sense to me, as the people's protector should want them to be free. And with a laugh, I walked in front of Garfield and proceeded to lean forward and look directly into his eyes with my own. You are but only a scared little boy who thinks they know everything about the world. You have deluded yourself with this idea that the people inside of this sanctuary would be better off to stay than to escape. Swish. Easily leaning back and dodging one of his punches. He immediately started to throw S barrage of punches towards me. What do you know, ye bastard? Why don't know what I've seen out there? I don't give a damn what's out there. To place took away my mother and even my sister. Dodging all of the punches with ease, I let out a yawn before stepping out of his range and looked at him with a bored expression. So a bad thing happens to you and everyone around you has to suffer because of it. You aren't just a hypocrite, you're a dangerous one. Swish. Endangering the lives of your so-called loved ones with what you think is best. Instead of being their protector, you're a jailer. Swish. If Rosewall is a clown, you must be the circus. Enraged from my words and ability to dodge, he threw a wild hook in both panic and frustration. Stop already. Pow. Punching him in his liver with a reinforced left upper at full power, his legs flew off the ground, making his aura disappear. Noticing this, I decided to put the nail in the coffin and aim for his liver once again. Pow. As the sound of my fist hitting his body resounded out throughout the forest, his legs totally shut down and he crumpled to ground. Looking down with an bored expression, I looked to see what the time was and noticed the sun nearing its time to come up. Hearing sobs, I looked down and saw Garfield's body convulse from his sobs. And with an emotionless face, I picked him up by his hair and made him look directly into my eyes. If you want me to tell you about your mother, you need to beat your past. And if you want me to take you to your mother, you need to exit this place you call Sanctuary. If you want to someday beat me, go out into the world and make a name for yourself. Once you do that, then maybe you could make for a warm-up. Letting go of his hair, his face made an audible slap as it hit the cold and hard ground. And with a yawn, I decided that now is a good time to check on Amelia. Reinforcing my memory, I went over how Garfield led me here before taking a step in what I assumed to be the right direction. But before I could take a step with my other leg, I felt a hand wrap around my ankle. I swear, I'll pay you be back. Why? Bastard. Then you'll tell me about mother. And as the damage from his transformation and my blows ran throughout his brain, he passed out while still grasping tightly onto my leg. I then felt a hot liquid flow down slowly from the back of my head and reached up to touch it. Putting my hand in front of my face, I saw just a bit of blood, so I can probably count it as a graze. I then stared down at him for a few seconds before nodding and grabbing him by the back of his shirt only to throw him onto my shoulder and started to walk. Congrats, kid, you managed to graze me. So pat yourself on the back, you deserve it. Oh wait, he's unconscious. I got a good idea. Let me just pat. There we go. 11 comments, 0 vote. Who is underscore? Walking inside of the cabin with Garfield's skin over my shoulder, I was met by one of the Ryazu clones in the living room. She stood there and looked at Garfield before looking at me with a frown. Leave him on the couch, I'll take care of him while you take care of the half-elf girl. The two maids tried to chase her, but she managed to escape them. Dropping him on the couch, I looked over towards Amelia's room and noticed the door to be completely unhinged and thrown to the ground. Walking through the entrance to her room, I could see what could only be described as mass destruction inside of her room. Walls were scratched with nails, dressers were either totally broken or thrown aside, broken glass littered the floor from a broken window. She really did make a mess, didn't she? Coming out of the room, I looked towards Ryazu, who was taking care of the unconscious Garfield. Your eyes know where she's located. Pausing her examination, she turned towards me and gave a quick no by shaking her head before continuing. Sighing, I strengthened my sense of smell before going back inside of the room. Going towards the bed, I took a sniff of one of the pillows, familiarizing myself with it before walking out of the room once again. Looking towards the Ryazu clone one more time, I let out a smirk before going outside of the door. Check his sides and jaw. And with that I closed the door of the cabin and calmly began to follow Amelia's scent. Walking through the darkness of the sanctuary, I noticed the lack of people out and let out a small smile. I had actually planned on letting Otto do his thing when I ever fought Garfield. Fun thing about fighting in a forest is that a ton of animals will notice the irregularity. And as Otto can literally speak to animals, he is and was the perfect man for sneaking people out of this sanctuary. Now that I think about it, shouldn't he be done by now? Flap. Hearing the beating of wings, I turned and looked at a raven that had landed on my shoulder. Looking into its eyes, it gave a quick nod before flying off into the dense forestry. Huh, guess he is finished. And I'll even give him style points for asking a raven to report his status. Anyways, this should mean that the villagers have successfully escaped and I don't have to worry anymore about them being eaten by rabbits. After casually scrolling for about 10 minutes, I found Amelia's scent leading directly into the entrance of the sanctuary's ruins. And directly outside of the ruins was Rem and Ram, who I assume followed the Amelia's scent also. Barasu, is Garfield out of the situation? Ram asked calmly when noticing my presence. Smiling at her question, I touched the cut on the back of my head. Yeah, he'll be out for a while. He'll also be peeing blood for a while. I got a couple good shots in on his liver. Looking at me with complicated eyes, she let out a sigh before looking towards the ruins. Well, that's good, we don't have to deal with him now. But we do have another issue at hand. Rem, noticing her sister's pause, also let out a sigh before looking at me. Amelia has gone into the ruins, making us forced to wait on her. As Rem says, we can only hope she passes the trial or doesn't come out worse. Ram said with a frown. Yawning, I noticed the sun starting to fully show itself on the horizon. Averting my gaze from the bright light in my eyes, I let a sigh and looked into the darkness present inside the ruins entrance. And with my frown still present on my face, I walked up some steps before finding myself directly in front of its entrance. Get away if you don't want your gate to get injured. Ram said while I assumed that she was currently looking at me like I was idiot. It's all right, sister. Rem said coolly. He knows what's he doing. Frowning towards Ram, she stared at her a bit before letting out a long exhale and looked at me with a calm expression. Don't get yourself killed now. We still have much to do, Barasu. And we unfortunately can't complete it all without you. Laughing a bit, I looked over at the twins and let out a confident smile before stepping through the entrance and into its darkness. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. Hearing my steps echo as I went forward, I looked at the walls of the ruins and noticed a slight chill beginning to appear in the air. And as I noticed it, I let out a frown and looked down to notice Amelia laying down and unconscious. Seeing this, I let out a smirk and sat on one of the walls close to her but not directly at her location. I would like to avoid being pulled into my mind by another individual and then get manipulated. And propping my back against their wall of the corridor, I decided to close my eyes and began to wait for Amelia to wake up. But as I closed my eyes, I felt someone's amused gaze falling onto me. You have the rights to take the first trial, congratulations. And with those words falling upon my ears, my eyes shot open, making me notice myself in what looks to be a bar. Inside of it was a ton of random people talking, flirting, and drinking. Hey bartender. Sitting there confused, I looked at the bar owner and tried to signal for him to come over. But for some odd reason, I couldn't catch his attention with my words. Bartender, I need a drink. Yelling once again with my loudest yell, yes, nobody seemed to even notice, and the bartender just calmly served a drink to the guy next to me. Turning over to see who was drinking, I noticed him wearing what looks like to be his working uniform. He had a fresh shaven face along with brown hair and brown eyes. Hey, can I get a, Never mind. Just surprise me. The man said to the bartender before looking up something on his phone. And while the bartender was making a random cocktail of his choosing, he turned to look at the man before letting out a frown. So what exactly brings you out here? Not a lot of people come here because of our notoriously high crime rates. People usually come here looking for a life in the gangs or protection using them. Getting done with the cocktail, the bartender put it on the table before leaning forward to meet the man's eyes. So stranger, what exactly did you come here for? What reasons dragged you to this hellhole? Taking a sip of the cocktail, the man then let out a light exhale before looking up at the bartender with dull eyes. I didn't come here for any good reason, I just saw that the lodging was cheap and moved in. And my name is Stranger, it's John, nice to meet you mister. Examining John's facial features closely, he didn't make out a lie and just shrugged his shoulders and grunted. My name doesn't matter. It's a thing of the past by this point. Well then what do they call you? The man said with an amused grin. They call me old man, uncle, or sir. The bartender said before noticing the last guy besides John leaving the bar inside. He then walked calmly over towards the entrance and flipped the open sign to closed and pulled out some keys before locking it. He then pocketed the keys before going around the counter and picking up a big bottle of alcohol. Placing it in the counter, he then grabbed 2 shot glasses and also placed those down before taking a seat next to John. So John, as tonight feels like a good night. Why don't you tell me the full story? Laughing at the bartender's words, he grabbed the bottle and poured himself a shot before bringing it up and staring into the liquid. Sure. Why not? But I might need a bit of this to make it through tonight, so bear with me please. Taking a shot, he visibly calmed down and stared directly into the eyes of bartender. I'd say it started really early. Like it affected me from my childhood until even now. So please listen closely as I go over just some of the things that have made me who I am. John said while pouring another shot and downing it. All right, will do. The bartender responded respectfully. I'll stick with you until the end. That's good. John said with a smile. That's very good. 8 comments 0 vote. Average. 20 years before transmigration. Sitting near the end of a almost empty bus, a teenager was seen looking at a book with some earbuds in. Sighing, he closed the book before leaning back and closed his eyes as the music played. Why is everything so boring? The teen said while looking outside of window and getting lost in his own thoughts as the many trees and houses flew by his vision. Why can't anything exciting happen for once? Touching his backpack, he remembered that he had a choice essay of any book of his choosing to do and let out a long and exhausted sigh. He then looked around on his bus and noticed it was empty besides his driver and let out a frown. The emptiness of the bus made him think of how his social life with other students was. And it was for the simple fact that he just didn't mix well with them. One of them had different interests and hobbies that starkly contradicted his own. He had a flip phone, but he was never using it for phone calls. He was either scrolling through forums for jokes to make him chuckle or reading light novels. It wasn't like he was bullied or was a social outcast, but he just didn't know anybody and neither did anyone know him. It was more or less like everyone knew who his name and he knew theirs. Things that made them excited or sad were completely foreign to him and made him confused. And at the same time it made him disgusted. He remembered when someone died from drinking and driving and everyone made a big deal out of it. But they all probably didn't even care, he certainly knows he didn't. But the hypocrisy of mourning a death for popularity made him look down on them. Hiss. Hearing the hiss of the bus, he walked to the front of the bus and took a quick glance at the bus driver. See ya. Hearing him, the driver grunted a bit and nodded towards him in silence. See ya kid. Stepping on the asphalt of the road, he walked forward a bit before making it onto the sidewalk. Once on the sidewalk, he started walking towards his home while some old country started to play. Listening to the lyrics silently, he examined the many things surrounding himself. The people going on about their daily activities, the dog he always walks past barking once again, the old man who's always sitting on his front porch smoking. All of these things were something he had seen before and it didn't bring him a sliver of interest or curiosity. He had grown used to everything around himself and just floated about his days like he did the day before and before that day once again. And after a few more minutes of walking, he had finally made it to his home. Looking at it, you could see that it had gotten an extension at one point as one part of it was brick while another part was wood. The roof was metal platted and the grass had started to become too long once again. Walking down the driveway, he quickly found himself at the front door which had a screen door. Only issue was that the screen door had its window broken so it was blocked off by a white piece of cardboard. Opening the screen door, he quickly leaned on it so it wouldn't shut while he reached into his pockets. Feeling his house keys, he brought them out and played with the lock of the front door before successfully unlocking. Bark. Hearing the high-pitched barks behind the door, he let out a sigh before opening the door and stepping inside and looking down at a barking pug. Walking. Yeah, I understand, girl. He calmly said before walking towards his room. I'll give you some attention in a bit, just let me rest, okay? Bark. The pug barked out before jumping on his pant leg, causing him to stop. Looking down, he let out a sigh before picking her up and carrying her towards his room. Fine, you win. I'll let you hang out with me in my room today. Coming to his room's door, he held the pug with one arm before twisting the doorknob and stepped inside. Looking around, he looked at the room that he still hasn't made a single change to. Everything from him being a little kid to being a teenager is here. Well, except for his bed, nobody wants to sleep in a bed dedicated to a kid show. Placing his dog in the bed, he got under the covers and let out a chuckle as she licked his face for a few seconds before going and laying down on the edge of the bed. Fidgeting with his sound player for a few minutes, he got bored and decided to just go ahead and take a quick nap. Ring. Waking up groggily, he reached over into his desktop, checked the time on his phone and noticed it was nearing midnight and let out a surprised expression before accepting the call. Who is it? He said sleepily while staring at the ceiling. Excuse me, is this John? The unfamiliar voice of a female asked. John Books. Yeah, that's me, what exactly is it that you need from me? He said while wondering how this woman knew his phone number. Well, I'm sorry to say, John, but your mother was involved in a crash with an 18-wheeler. The voice said with sympathy. She was intoxicated and didn't make it. John, hearing her, made a frown as he stared at the ceiling above. I see. Thank you. My condolences, John. The lady said before ending the call, leaving John in silence. 2 weeks later. Standing before the grave of his mother, John let out a frown. For some odd reason, he didn't feel anything towards this situation. To be honest, he genuinely doubted if they even loved each other. Sure, they both lived the same house and used the same water, but he could painfully tell that there was distance between mother and son. When hugging her and saying that he loved her before heading to school, he was just saying empty words. And when she responded with, I love you too, be safe, he could obviously tell that it was also empty. But he should feel bad, right? He should at least feel a drop in his head, right? I mean, at least he had cried and showed genuine emotion towards one of his earlier high school flicks. And that breakup had actually made him shed a tear for once. His mother had given him a stable life to enjoy and provided him stable education. She had fed him and gave him water, but there wasn't a bit of love. His mother had become an alcoholic after he hit his teens, and they had from then on progressively became distant. And since John never asked for anything, she had no reason to provide him gifts. So her drinking increased and she also became interested in things that made John question her sanity. She started to go on and on about politics and real news. It became the only thing she could talk about. If he had to guess, maybe it was a desperate attempt to get her mind off of John. After all, he knew that she also felt the huge gap between each other. So she proceeded to drown herself in fantasy. Like how Hitler faked his death or that the world was going to end. Really, John had just grown used to her antics. He could have done something about it, but he just didn't feel like it. Apathy was a deep-rooted trait of his. And as his mother's issues increased, his apathy towards her increased. And after a few years of watching her decent, he began to view her as air. He knew this wasn't what a mentally sane person would think of their mother as. But for some reason, it only felt natural to him. So he slowly began to treat others like this too. He didn't care what happened to anyone or anything. Or at least as long as it didn't affect him. Still staring down at his mother's grave in silence, he let out a sigh before exiting the graveyard. Goodbye, mother. 20 years later. Looking on his phone, he looked at a picture which showed him in military uniform. When little, he had done many types of sports ranging from baseball, soccer, and basketball. While in high school, he decided to join the boxing team in his senior year after his mother died and had actually managed to take himself to the final round of regionals. He didn't get knocked out but instead had lost in points. And ever since then, he had grown into a habit of keeping his body and skills in shape after high school. But all this hard work could only be described as a hobby to John. Upon realizing that he had no motivations, he decided to just go ahead and sign up for the army and then see what he should do from there. But long and behold, his country was in peacetime, so he was sent out after a few years of service. Of course, he decided to take up the job training and took the medical class. His goal was actually to become a medic and sit in the back lines in case war did actually break out. He was not going to risk getting a bullet to the temple or having a napalm strike land directly on himself. But after completing his courses, he was sent to a small military area out in the country to watch over its perimeter. And after 20 years of service, John was finally able to retire and get a monthly pay for the rest of his life. But as it was monthly and just enough money to survive off of, John decided to get a job at a pizza place near his apartment complex. And he was glad he did retire at that time, because they immediately went to war after his retirement. Laughing to himself, he decided to close his photos before bringing up a light novel. In all these 20 long years, he still had not given up on his hobby of reading. Finally finished with Zero's Arc 5. John said with a yawn before looking at the time on his phone and grumbled. Welp, I guess it's time for work. Putting on his uniform, he brushed his teeth in the bathroom before walking by a table and picking up his keys. He then opened a mini fridge and pulled out a bottle of water and drank it. Throwing it into the garbage can near the mini fridge, he noticed that it was starting overfill and took note to empty it once he returned back home tonight. Opening the door of his apartment, he walked outside into the hall before walking towards the elevator. Going to press the button, he stopped as he noticed a sticky note slapped into it. Out of order. Tisk, stairs it is then. John said before walking in the direction he came. And once a little past his apartment's door, he saw the set of stairs with a wet floor sign. Not caring at all about the sign, he walked into the slippery floor and felt his feet come out from under him as he flew forward. Wah! As his body flew down the set of stairs, making his vision spin and blurred, before he knew it, he was flying head first towards a wall. Crack! And with his neck audibly cracking, his body visibly stiffened before relaxing and collapsing to the ground with a thud. This is how John's life ended. 12 comments, 0 vote. Internal conversations. Sitting on a couch inside a pitch-black space that spanned for what seemed to be infinity, I looked at the now static screen of the television before turning to look at John. We got any popcorn left? I asked him casually as I made a soda appear in my left. Hearing me, he looked over at me with an annoyed frown. Dude, if you can make a soda magically appear, you sure as hell do the same with popcorn. You're no fun. I said with a sigh before making a bag appear in my hand. So you're calling yourself bland? He said with a smirk. Or did you forget you're me? Looking over him with an uninterested expression, I let open my soda before taking a swig. Well, that's where you're wrong, John. Oh. Please tell me how I'm wrong. I mean, come on, really. Did you not just see us die? John said as he made a table appear in front of the couch before putting his legs on top of it. Making a confident smile, I took a good look at me. Well, I won't lie, I certainly did die, that is a fact. But you weren't the one who died, now were you? In reality, you're John. Or to be precise, the many years I spent as John. You are only pieces of memory put together to create an image of my past. So you are not me, or a separate entity, you are but an illusion formed by my mind. I'm technically speaking to myself right now. While smirking, John leaned back and stared at the static screen of the television. Well, you right, Subaru. That is what we go by, yes. I'm just a mesh of all your memories put together to form an image of our past life. And it was surprisingly effective because you strengthened your memories. Looking at the television, I let out a yawn of boredom before getting off the couch and walking behind it. Well, it's been fun, John. Propping his arm on top of the couch, John turned to stare at me and put up his hand casually. Yeah, you too, Subaru. Waving my hand, I made a normal door appear in front of me. Seeing it appear, I let out a smile before opening it and stepping through it. And as I stepped through, I noticed the familiar sight of a certain grassland with a table in the middle of it. The table was still covered by the umbrella on top of it, giving it shade. Walking up to it, I proceeded to sit down before staring at the person sitting in front of me and raised an eyebrow. What exactly is do you want from me, Typhon? Hand. She said in a very straightforward manner as her red eyes drilled into my own. She then brought her hand forward as she swept her dark green bangs to the side. Curious of how exactly her authority would affect me, I met her hand with my own. This is very interesting. She said with a childlike curiosity. You don't seem to hold any guilt whatsoever ever. She then pulled my now detached arm away before dropping it and looking up at me with interest once again. What exactly do you consider, essence, sir? Not at all bothered by my detached arm, I scratched my chin in thought before looking down at Typhon. Well, sin is bad, correct? Yes, sin is bad. She said with a resolute nod. It is very bad. Smiling, I closed my eyes and leaned back and started to speak. Well, sin or evil is really something you consider wrong. So if you consider something right while another thinks it wrong, they would say you did evil. Evil stems from morality. Or what you think is right or wrong. I said before noticing that she seemed a bit confused. Let's say you steal a piece of bread, you would feel bad, right? Looking up at me, she dumbly nodded her head. Yes, stealing is bad, what about it? Well then let's say you stole it for a sick and dying homeless man. Would you still be guilty of stealing the bread? Making a confused expression, she tilted her head dumbly. Yeah, I would. Stealing is still a bad. Then what if the old man died because you didn't steal that bread? I questioned calmly while staring into her eyes. What would you think then? Scrunching up her eyebrows together, she let out a confused pout. Well. Yeah. I would. Then what you do? Let the old man die or steal the bread. Sitting silently in thought, she scrunched her eyebrows in frustration before looking up at me with a pout. I don't know, you tell me what you would do. Letting out a chuckle, I then looked at her with a flat expression. I would simply steal the bread for myself and let the old man rot. I probably don't even know him anyway. And anything that helps or benefits me in any way is something I consider good. Looking up and staring directly into my eyes for a good minute. She broke away and tiredly muttered. Then what do you consider evil? Anything that goes against me, of course. I said with a calm smile as I looked at the little girl. Closing her eyes, she let out a sigh before jumping off her chair and walked over to M before touching my leg. She then raised her eyebrow before looking up at me with a calm expression. Well, I don't at all agree with your outlook on good or evil. But you clearly don't have any guilt and neither do you view yourself as a villain. So I guess you are a good guy after all, Subaru. She said with a bright smile before suddenly opening her eyes in realization. Oh yeah. Tell Minerva I said hello. As I then blinked, she disappeared, causing me to look up around for where Typhon went. Not finding her, I scratched my head with my remaining arm before looking up and noticing a falling figure. Upon seeing her, I let out a sigh. Welp, this is going to hurt. Boom. And as a giant explosion then went off directly where I was, a blonde figure stomped on the ground, causing all of the dust to clear away. With the dust finally clear, I looked up to notice a blonde and petite female with good curves staring down at me with blue eyes. And as I moved both my arms, I immediately realized that she was Minerva, the Witch of Wrath. Sniff. Damn you, Typhon. Why did she have to rough you up like that? Minerva said as tears rolled down her face before stomping on the ground. What is up with her and taking people's body parts? Why can't she see that it hurts people? Getting up on my feet, I looked at the raging Minerva with and started to chuckle. Thanks for the hand, Minerva. Immediately freezing up, she looked directly at me with an exasperated expression. Did you seriously just make a pun? Shrugging my shoulders, I scratched the back of my head before walking down the table and sitting back down. I was just feeling a bit bored, I suppose. Staring at me in frustration, she just let out a deep sigh before coming near me. And once she was directly near me, she smacked the back of my head softly and muttered quietly. Be more careful about getting injured, okay? Also disappearing, I looked around once again and wondered what witch I was going to see this time around. But as I looked around, the sound of teacup hitting table caught my attention. Turning, I saw Echidna pick up her cup before drinking once again. Finally noticed me, Subaru. Echidna said calmly as she stared at me with an apologetic look in her eyes. I apologize dearly for being late to the tea party. Typhon was extremely interested in you and Minerva couldn't stand your wounds. Frowning, I looked at the tea in front of me before taking a sip from it and calmly stared directly into her eyes. We both know you just wanted to see what would happen if I met with them. Also letting out a calm smile of her own, she took a sip out of her own cup. Well, you aren't wrong, I certainly was interested in what would happen. But we both know that's not the main thing I'm curious about. She then let out a chuckle as her eyes coldly went over me. I'm just dying to know more about that novel you call, 0. 11 comments 0 vote. A kiss goodbye. I clearly remember warning you about diving into my brain, Echidna. I said calmly while drinking the tea. Hearing me, her eyes immediately got colder before a ton of unseen hands appeared before her. Explain. She said coldly as the hands nearing the hundreds starting to clench into a fist one by one. Now. Hearing her, I put down the cup before letting out a long sigh of boredom and looked her directly in the eye. What should I explain that you don't already know? Because I seriously doubt that you haven't already memorized every bit of my personality and memory. Staring into each other's eyes for a few more minutes I silence. She seemed to give up and looked away with a depressing sigh as the hands behind her all disappeared. After that, she turned towards me with a complicated expression. So I'm just a character of a fiction. She said with an empty tone before putting her head on the table and groaned. This sucks. Shouldn't have gone digging into my skull then. I teased her while making an amused grin. What's the saying again? You reap what you sow. She mumbled out as her head still laid on the table. That's the one you're looking for. Putting a fist on top of my palm with a thud, I looked down at her with a smile. Yeah, that's the one. You reap what you sow. Groaning in annoyance, she pulled her head up and stared at me with cold eyes. Who's to say you aren't a fictional character then? If I'm just the result of someone's creativity, then what about you? Closing my eyes in thought, I proceeded to thump my fingers on the surface of the table. She certainly does have a point, doesn't she? But there is only one issue with that statement. If someone with the knowledge of this world has come into it, then is this simply a novel? I seriously doubt it. This world could simply be a universe of its own. And if this world exists, then what about other fictional works? And who's to say in the only one too? Oh. Coming to a realization, I immediately stared to chuckle. Echidna, hearing me, raised her head and viewed me with interest. What? Did the possibility make you go insane? No. Just came to a sudden realization is all. I said with a chuckle before taking another sip of tea. I just remembered the sudden need to take care of something is all. Raising an eyebrow, she propped her chin on her arms before looking towards me with even more interest present inside those raven black eyes of hers. So you didn't think about the idea of you also being fictional? Putting down the cup, I looked into her eyes casually. Yeah, but I don't think this world is fictional. I think I'm good enough proof of that. My knowledge of this world being a novel isn't valid whatsoever. I'd say this is a separate universe of its own entirely. Me existing in this world is proof enough that this ain't a novel. Or at least the same one. So you are without doubt an entity. Or at least a spiritual one as you are currently dead. Tilting her head into thought, he propped her elbows on the table before cupping her chin with her left hand. I suppose we could go by that logic. It would at least keep us sane if we rationalize this situation like that. Or we could simply erase your memories of it. I said calmly to her. That would also make this problem extremely simple. Looking at me like I was an idiot, she proceeded to let out a snort. You'd just love that, wouldn't you? Calmly smiling, I just nodded my head slowly before taking another sip out of the cup in front of me. Well, I'm afraid I won't be able to do that. I'd just be wasting precious knowledge at that point. I looked coldly towards her before feeling a tug on my being causing me to smile. Guess it's finally time for me to get out to her. Oh. Leaving already are we? Echidna said with a hint of genuine disappointment present inside of her tone. Leaving a lady all by her lonesome without a kiss. How cold of you. I'm not the one controlling it. I said flatly as I felt the tug gradually grown stronger. It's completely your fault for making it this way. It hurts to know just how correct that is. She said with a pout before suddenly appearing on my lap with a teasing smile. But I'll let you leave with something good this time. You have after all shared a secret of immense that nobody else in this world knows but you. But I didn't share it. You santo. Getting interrupted by her suddenly planting her lips directly on mine. I then proceeded to close my eyes as I focused on the situation inside of my head. They're all done. She said brightly while bringing her face back. You should have gotten my gift just now. Looking inside of my head, I found what I was looking for and opened my eyes to let out a chuckle. Should have known that you were holding a lot of the good stuff locked up. Well, I am a witch after all. She said with a sly smirk as my vision started to fade to black. Good luck, Subaru. Subaru. Wake up. Please. Don't leave me too. Hearing Amelia's voice, I opened my eyes and saw her looking down with tears. Noticing my now open eyes and steady breathing, she let out a sigh of relief as her tears still flowed. Thank the divines, you finally woke up, Subaru. I was starting to get that you. Hick. That you. Hick. Also. Seeing her about to cry, I immediately got off her lap before embracing her softly. It's okay, I am still here. I don't plan to die or leave anytime soon. Patting her on the back, I felt her tears wet my shirt and grimaced a bit. Guess I'm going to use my tracksuit tomorrow and hang this outside to dry after washing it. Licking my finger while still embracing Amelia, I stuck it up and felt the air of the entrance coming from my left. Noticing that the air had a chill to it, I let out a smirk. It seems tomorrow will be the start of Wabbit season. Anyways, I focused on calming Amelia's tears and thankfully didn't have to wait long as she pulled herself together faster than I anticipated. Now noticing that her crying has stopped, I looked down and noticed that she was peacefully sleeping inside of my arms. It seems I won't be able to ask about the trials until later, huh? I said with a frown before picking her up into a princess carry. But then again, I guess that would be a bit insensitive of me. Looking again at the sleeping Amelia's peaceful face, I let out a smirk as I walked towards the exit of the ruins. If she can sleep this peacefully, I can only guess that it went pretty well this time. Feeling a fragment of some unique kind of stone inside of my pocket, I let out a smirk as I thought back to my fight with Garfield. I wonder how that kid's taking his loss. 8 comments 0 vote. Snow. Subaru. What are you doing in here? Amelia quietly questioned before awakening me with a slight nudge. Feeling the nudge, I let out a yawn and rubbed my eyes before sitting up and removing my head from her bedside. Looking around at the room we are in, I let out a smirk noticing the lack of destruction. Why am I sleeping here? Isn't this your room? Amelia asked with confusion present on her face. Because your room was thrashed. I said casually before getting up from my chair and putting it under a desk present. And I'm still a bit tired from dealing with Sloth and the white whale. So I just made it simple and let you sleep in here. Oh, I see. Amelia said before putting her head down. Sorry to bother you. Sighing, I walked towards her before patting her on the back. I don't want to hear a sorry, all I want to hear is a simple thank you. Hearing me, Amelia raised her head and stared at me in silence, earning a simple smile in response. Seeing me smile, she came to a realization and let out a breath before forcing a smile. Thank you, Subaru. You don't have to try so hard. I replied with a snort, causing her to chuckle. Noticing her laughter, I looked at her with a look of confusion. Something on my face. No. She denied as she collected herself before wiping her eyes of their wetness. Nothing like that. Then what is it? Pausing, she looked up at me before letting out a genuine smile of gratitude. Thank you again, Subaru. What are you thanking me for? Haven't you already done so? It's nothing. She said while waving her hand. Then with a small smile, she closed her eyes and brought her hands over her breasts. It's not something you would get. Knock. 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 Coming. I yelled out before going towards the door and placing my hand on the knob. Twisting it, I opened it only to see Ryazu standing there. She then mouthed out the word snow before pointing towards the main door of her cabin. Seeing this, I let out a frown towards her before turning towards Amelia with a curious expression. Amelia, I have a question. What is it? She said with a curiosity expression before leaning to try and see who was in front of me. Also, who is it at the door? Immediately turning towards Ryazu, I coldly stared at her before moving my eyes to the left. Seeing this, she nodded before leaving with muffled steps. Nobody was at the door. I said with a sigh before closing it. Must have been the sound of the cabin settling. That's weird. She whispered before laying down. Once on her back, she raised her head and looked at me. Are you positive? I swore I heard somebody earlier. Nodding towards her, I walked towards the desk before letting out a sigh. Looking through the window of the cabin, I could see that it had indeed started to snow. Amelia, did you pass? I said flatly while staring out of the window. And I'm talking about the trial. Hearing her silence, I let out a frown before turning over to look at her. But once I laid my eyes on her face, I knew something had changed. Yes. She said with a sort of melancholy present on her face. Yes, I did. Walking towards the side of her bed, I raised my hand towards her. Pat. Well done, Amelia. And with a quick rub of her hair, I put my hand down before walking towards the door of her room and opened it. Thank you. Walking out to the door, I saw Garfield sitting on the couch with a complicated. Seeing him like this, I calmly took a seat next to him. Did to half-elf pass? Garfield suddenly asked with a hint of worry inside of his voice. Yes, Amelia, passed the trial. I said calmly as I moved my head towards him. She has successfully overcome the past. I see. Garfield said quietly before taking a shaky breath. She passed. I passed also. I said calmly before letting out a yawn and pointing towards him. But both of our pasts put together isn't nearly as tragic as hers. Freezing up, he looked towards me in shock. What did you say? Her past is tragic. I said with a confused expression. Before that ye bastard. He yelled before grasping my shoulders. Repeat what you just said. She passed. You passed too. He questioned while grinding his teeth. Ye could have taken to trails in her stead. Immediately, my expression turned cold, causing him to flinch. Get your hands off me and quiet down. Taking hands off and going quiet. I immediately changed my expression into a bright smile. Thank you. Why? He said with a stutter. Did whine it to it in her stead. Hearing this question, I just let out a sigh before staring at him with a bored expression. Because I didn't want to. And that witch would just love to dig deeper into my head. So I'd rather avoid doing any more of her trails. That's no good reason. He said with extreme venom. That's no good reason at all. But you can also take the trials also. I said coldly. Why don't you take them then? Or is the protector of the sanctuary afraid of his past? Going silent, he almost looked as if he was going to jump at me but jumped in pain before grabbing his side. After that, he let out a tisk before getting up and walked towards the door. But as he opened the door to step outside, he suddenly stopped. Is what you said about my mother true? Yes. Slam. Hearing him slam the door, I let out a sigh before reaching into my pocket. Pulling out a stone fragment, I proceeded to think of Ryazu. You needed me. Hearing her, I let out an intrigued expression before looking towards the kitchen. Standing there was a Ryazu clone. Were you listening in on the conversation? As she nodded her head, I let out a sigh before giving her a serious stare. And with a thought, the stone inside of my hand started to glow. Go and get Betty for me. Will do. She calmly replied before walking outside of the cabin's door. Now done talking, I pocketed the stone before leaning back on the couch. The reason why Garfield didn't question me on this stone's whereabouts is because it's just a fragment. Or better yet, a fragment of his fragment. I just hit it really hard and it broke into different pieces. And once done, I took one of the pieces and left him with the rest. He most definitely thinks it broke during the battle and probably doesn't even suspect me of controlling the Ryazu clones behind his back. But I am curious. What will his decision be? Will he take the trials along with Amelia? Or will he simply give up on his protector business? Sighing, I looked at the table in front of me and remembered the meal and drink I had the night before. Hearing my stomach rumble and throat grow dry, I got up and went towards the kitchen. And while I'm at it, I might as well cook up something for Rem also. I've been far too busy lately to properly pay attention to her. But after I'm done here in Sanctuary, I will without a doubt use some of my free time properly. At least on the days I'm not training. Or work on the company that I pack to make using Russell's backing. And at the very least on days I'm not experimenting. Staring at the ingredients in front of me, I'm silent for a moment or two. I proceeded to shrug my shoulders before getting to work. I'll be sure to make time. 5 comments 0 vote. Some time with Rem. Stepping back from the counter, I let out a sigh before looking down at what I had cooked. On both plates were French fries, steaks, and some fried cabbage. As the sanctuary only gets their food from either the outside by trade or through farming, this was all that I could work with. Subaru. Rem's voice came from the front of the cabin. Where are you? Hearing her, I let out a small smile before grabbing both plates of food and walked out of the kitchen. Yeah, I was just cooking some food. Seeing me, Rem let out a smile before stepping up to me and giving me a hug, causing me to raise the plates up in the air. Rem. Can I put down the food first? She then looked up from my chest with a look of expectance inside her eyes. Sighing, I leaned down and gave her a kiss before pulling back with a small smile. Good morning, Rem. Letting out a smile of her own, she unwrapped her arms around me before looking at the food in my hands. Good morning, Subaru. May I ask why you prepared so much for breakfast? Sighing, I proceeded to walk past her and sat on the couch before placing the plates on the table in front of me. I then grabbed some utensils along with a few napkins from inside my pocket and set them properly between the 2 plates. And with a smile, I looked up at the intrigued Rem before patting the seat next to me. But as she didn't get the message. It caused me to let out a small sigh. I made this for the both of us. I said calmly before noticing the lack of drinks. Oh. I forgot drinks. Go ahead and take a seat while I get some cups. Got it. She said happily before sitting on the couch and looked at the food in front of her. Thank you, Subaru. Going to the kitchen, I found some glass cups and looked around for some place to get water. Oh wait. There isn't a sink or a dispensable fridge in this time period. Realizing this, I let out a sigh before walking inside the room with the 2 empty cups and placed them on the table. Taking a seat next to Rem, I had a complicated face as I turned towards her and raised my hands towards the glassware. Can you? Letting out a smirk, she raised her hand towards the cup before using water magic to sending 2 separate streams into the cups. Once the cups were full, I immediately grabbed a fork and knife before starting to cut into my steak. Rem noticing this tugged at my sleeve with a small frown. Subaru, manners please. Hearing her, I let out a sigh before looking down at my food and put down my utensils. Once done with that, I proceeded to close my eyes and put my hands together. Thank you for this food. Once done, I silently ate my food while enjoying Rem's presence. Now that I think about it, I don't think I have ever had a reason to use table manners. I remember using table manners as a kid and until I hit my teens. But after a certain point in my life, I saw no reason to follow those things anymore. Anyways, Rem and I silently ate our food until the plates were cleaned and the cups were empty. Rem had of course refilled them with her water magic when needed. I'll clean this up. I said as I dabbed my napkin against my lips. I'll help you with that. She said before picking up her plate and put her utensils on it before picking up her glass also and walked towards the kitchen. Seeing this, I just rubbed my hands on my napkin before throwing it onto the plate. I then reached over towards my glass and utensils before putting it on top of the plate. Going into the kitchen, I noticed Rem using her magic and soap to wash her plate clean over a bucket. Looking over at me, she put her now clean plate to side before reaching her hand out to motion for my plate. Quickly handing it over, I leaned on the counter and watched her clean for a couple seconds before looking out of the window present inside of the kitchen and raised an eyebrow expression. Weird isn't it? Rem said calmly as she continued to work. It's snowing but it's extremely out of season. Finished with the plate, she reached her hand out once again and I handed her my cup. Grasping it, she brought it over the bucket before starting to clean again. Yeah. It is weird. I said quietly while staring at the snow-covered ground. The snow levels also seem to be rising. Quicker than normal. She hummed as she put down my glassware and reached out for my utensils. Are you perhaps familiar with weather like this? Handing her my utensils, I began to kick my legs back and forth in thought as I looked up at the ceiling with a frown. Yes, but I'd humbly admit that it's more knowledge than experience. Humility. Rem repeated with a chuckle before looking at me with a teasing smile. You're starting to sound like an old man, Subaru. I'm not old. I huffed out with a frown. If you add this body's age of 17 along with my 33-something years of life, I have had a total of 50 years of life. So I'm not old, I'm more or less a middle-aged individual. Now done with the dishes, she looked at the stacked plates, utensils, and glassware before turning towards me. Can you do me a favor and go dump the water out for the bucket? I need to put everything back in its proper place. Hopping off the counter, I gave her a kiss on the cheek before grabbing the bucket by its sides. Sure, I can do that. I then lifted it up with both my hands before heading towards the front door of the cabin. Once at the door, I looked around the room to make sure it was empty before using unseen hand to turn the knob and opened the door. Once the door was open, I felt the cold air hit my body causing me to shiver. In response to this, I let out a sigh before stepping outside and hearing the crunch of the snow beneath my feet. Picking my foot up, I did a rough measurement of how deep the snow is and came to an estimate of 2 inches. Seeing this, my frown deepened and my eyes turned serious. It seems Rosewall is gathering mana at a much faster rate than I expected. But then again, I would try my hardest also if my loss involved me becoming someone else's slave. Going to the side, I turned the bucket over and watched as the white turned a shade darker and melt a bit as it absorbed the water splashing on top of it. Looking around, I let out a sigh as I noticed the lack of people and decided to head back inside. Closing the door, I looked towards the kitchen and heard Rem messing with the cabinets. Hearing this, I proceeded to reach into my pocket and touch the stone that controls Ryazu before bringing it close to my mouth. Bring me Beatrice. I said coldly while holding the stone closer to my face. You have stalled long enough. Will do. A voice resounded in my head calmly before staring to gripe. Young people these days. So impatient. I've given you plenty of patience. I said with a frown before pocketing the stone. Is something to the matter, Subaru? Rem asked as she walked out of the kitchen and looked around the room. Weren't you just speaking to somebody? I immediately walked up to her before bringing her into my arms. Nothing is wrong, Rem. Confused but clearly happy to be hugged, Rem returned the favor in silence as she rested her head near my heart. She then stayed like that for a couple moments before looking up at me. Well, you aren't lying to me, she said happily with a smile as she poked my chest. I know, because your heartbeat didn't rise. Huh. I sounded out in confusion before looking down at her with a raised eyebrow. When did you memorize my heartbeat? And why? Looking down with a blush, she buried her head into my chest before raising her hand and putting one finger up. One what? Raising her head, she had a clear blush present on her cheeks as she looked to the side. Oh, on the night. We first had. On the night we first had S**x. I said with a teasing smile as I poked her blushing cheeks. It's awfully refreshing to see you like this, Rem. She sounded out in interest. It's refreshing. How so? Scratching my head, I looked down at her with an awkward smile. It's just. Well. I haven't really had much time to spend with you. Oh, so that's what it is. She said with a smirk before stepping out of my embrace and looking up at me. I don't mind that at all. Seriously. Of course I am. Dead serious actually. She said while nodding her head. She then closed her eyes before crossing her arms and looking at me with a smile. It's because I know for sure you think about me. Of course I am. Dead serious actually. She said while nodding her head. She then closed her eyes before crossing her arms and looking at me with a smile. It's because I know for sure you think about me. That fact alone makes waking up a pleasure to me, Subaru. And you being worried about how I feel and wanting to spend more time with me also makes me extremely happy. But I also know that you are an extremely capable person that somehow produces miracles like they are nothing. And besides, I know for a fact you've been busy trying to both help Amelia and the sanctuary. So no, Subaru, I don't mind the fact that you have been busy. Now smiling, I let out a sigh before taking a step towards her. But still. I said while leaning down near her ear and began to whisper something. Once done with my whisper, she blushed before softly punching me in the chest and looked away with embarrassment. Don't say stuff like that out of nowhere to tease me, you meanie. 11 comments, 0 vote.